Hello, my name is John Dennison of PeaceOptions.com, and today I'd like to speak with you about what's going on in the South China Sea. Recently, you may remember that there was a tweet by Donald Trump to let's see, you'll excuse me, I'm trying to talk while I'm learning this YouTube stuff while we're going here, and I'm trying to learn how to do a screen share. So let's see if we can figure this out together here. Because if I get it, then I can make reference to it and let you see some of the things that I'm looking at. And we'll go to an entire screen. We'll share the entire screen. And this isn't working. So we're going to have to stop the screen share. That's not working out so well for us. So we are going to stop screen sharing. Let's try this again. And we'll try one more time. See if I can get this right. I'll try an application window. And we will go to, let's try our application windows here. There we go. Got one. All right. We have the Trump tweet itself, where the president of Taiwan called him to wish him congratulations on winning the presidency of the United States. And this is something normally you would expect the heads of state calling to give their congratulations to the president-elect. But the situation with the president of Taiwan that is experiencing this it has created a number of problems, primarily because the history of our relationship with Taiwan is such that we really haven't spoken to Taiwan as an official capacity since 1979. By way of history or by way of background, you should understand that back in the 30s, after the Communist Revolution in Russia, there also had been one attempted in China too, by Mao Zedong, and it had failed in the 30s, but he continued with his movement of trying to gather people to his cause and present their case. And then the war with Japan started, or that we know as World War II. And after that war, and during that war, the head of the Chinese armies that were actually fighting against Japan was a gentleman by the name of Chiang Kai-shek, who was the general head of China. Chiang Kai-shek, and after the war, Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong were fighting to see who would have control of China. And basically, Mao's strategy was he withdrew from the cities into the countryside. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces took the cities, and then they were later starved out and forced out of China, where they fled to Taiwan and set up government there. So then the U.S. broke off relations with China. We used to call it Red China after Mao Zedong took over, and it was decades that went on like this, until 1973, when Nixon reopened relations with China. When Nixon reopened relations with China, he in turn promised that by treaty, or at least by agreement with the Chinese, that there would be one Chinese state that would be recognized by the United States, and basically that it would no longer represent a separate Taiwan, which the United States had recognized independently as a separate nation. So after 1973, we continued to recognize them until 79, and then in 79 we totally turned our backs on Taiwan diplomatically, though we continue to have relations with them, and we have continued over the years with this defense pact, where we have sold them weapons and provided them with training, and though I don't believe we have a mutual defense pact in terms of agreeing to come in and fight. Typically, our arrangement with them has been where we have backed the Taiwanese, or the nationalist Chinese, in their race against, or their efforts to be free and separate from the communist China that we know today. Taiwan, on the other hand, has gone through a number of of screen of changes. Taiwan now has just recently elected a new president themselves by the name of Zhao Yingluan. I'm trying to get you to the screen here and see if I can figure out how this works. Now let's go here. We'll go to. So it's asking me if I want to share the entire contents of my screen with Google Hangouts. If any of you know how to do this, I'd appreciate you giving me some notes down below, or sending me an email to peaceoptions@gmail.com, because I honestly can't not figure this out. Excuse me, I'm usually pretty good at most of this stuff, but when it comes to this video, I'm still learning, so please forgive me. We're going to try an application window here, and we're going to switch over again and let you see this window. And you can see here that Trump's Taiwan phone call that he had with this President Yang, the lady on the right, was just elected, but part of her campaign rhetoric, or her campaign promises, was she was taking a hard stand and trying to militarize and declare independence and have a separate state from China, and to be recognized as a separate state. And it is this policy that she was advocating that is being responded to by Trump. The Chinese were naturally incensed by, are naturally incensed by this situation, but they are, fortunately or unfortunately, unable to do much about it at this point. They have registered their objections. But now the question is, well, what is it that was going through Trump's mind at the time that he took this call? Because presidents and incoming presidents aren't even supposed to be speaking to Taiwan, because that's a breach of diplomatic protocol. So it appears that there may be a shift in policy coming with Trump and the U.S. policy of the past with regard to China and Taiwan. Now, at the same time that this is happening here, that we are going to Trump talking to Taiwan, the very same day, Trump also received a congratulatory phone call from none other than Rodrigo Duterte. So if you would let's bear with me here, and I'll see if I can get you Duterte's picture up. Let's see. I'm making headway. I'm doing better here. And so we're going to make Duterte a little larger. I guess I thought I was making him larger. There we go. And you can see Duterte. He is the president of the Philippines. And Trump received a call from the president of the Philippines on the very same day that he got the call from the president of Taiwan. And again, if you understand a little bit about what's been going on in the news lately, Duterte was elected in January of this year, and he is somewhat of a populist figure in the Philippines, very much like the Filipino Donald Trump. And Duterte has recently been pushing back against U.S. efforts to control him and force him to stop cracking down on drug lords. He's got a drug problem in his country as well, and he's been pretty heavy-handed in dealing with it. And so Obama's policy has been to threaten withholding money and arms from the Philippines to basically extort his cooperation. Duterte now, on the other hand, has pushed back, and he's recently gone to China, met with the Chinese, and then after meeting with the Chinese, he's come back and said that he wants to get closer to the Chinese, that he's willing to stand up to U.S. aggression, and if necessary, to break relations with them. This is one of the problems here, is that the Obama administration has allowed their relationship with this new President Duterte to get off on the wrong foot and continue to deteriorate. Now, I'll show you why this is actually so important here. Is that we have in, let's see if I can get this one up for you. What what we have here now, this is a map of the South China Sea. And you will notice here, as you look at the map, you see all these lines that are drawn on here. These are the trade routes that flow through the South China Sea. If you look down in the center left portion of it, down by Malaysia and Sumatra, the bulk of the shipping traffic, we're talking oil, we're talking goods and raw materials coming from the Middle East, coming from Europe, coming from Africa, are coming through this channel that goes between Sumatra, which is the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, and the Malaysian Peninsula, which Singapore's at the tip. This is called the Malacca Straits. This Malacca Straits, almost all of the traffic, or let's say 80% of the goods flowing to traffic and their oil flowing to China, flow through here. Now, if you look at above and you follow the routes towards across from China, or excuse me, between Vietnam and the Philippines, there is a group of islands. There is a group of islands that is located right in the center of the South China Sea, and I believe it's the Spratly Islands, but I'm not quite sure of that. I can't read it on my map. And what's happened is, that the Chinese, if you've been following the news, the Chinese have been reclaiming or trying to reclaim little atolls that are in the South China Sea, and to build them into military bases where they can have ships and fighter planes and bombers to control the region. Okay, we're going to go back and we'll see it again. We keep trying to share the link. Application window. We're going to get this right yet, guys. All right, and now we go to, and you see this little thing up here, this little picture I'm showing here. This is the original, I won't say grassy knoll. I guess I got JFK conspiracy theories on my mind today, but actually not. But this, you can see that they're dredging up sand from the basin, which they do along the beaches here in South Florida to try to reclaim the sand. But they're dredging up the sand and actually building an island. And so from this island, they are now going from the island where they are starting into what has become a complete base with hangars and buildings and just about everything. And so here we can see, you will see that we have here the entire island. Now up here in the upper right hand screen, if you look at it, sitting off by itself is the little area, this is Fiery Cross Reef is what it's called, in Spratly Islands. And this and the portion that was started was just up here in the very tip of the right. You can see they've built a harbor, they've built a very long 3,000-meter airstrip to handle all kinds of jet fighters and other heavy planes, and with all their bases and everything else. And they have been building several of these bases throughout the region. The situation isn't just limited to China, though, because as we get deeper and deeper into the situation, exploring it, we discover that these bases are not just in the South China Sea. We discover that the bases here, okay, let's see if I get this. I'm trying again. We'll see if we try it again. Let's see what happens when we share our entire screen, guys. Please bear with me. And I don't know what you're seeing, but I'm seeing all kinds of different windows open up here, and it doesn't seem to be working for me. So I have to test this another time. Let's go back to doing it one window at a time. And we will see here that we have here the South China Sea expanding. Vietnam itself is building islands in the Spratly Island. they're all claimed, the Philippines also claim atolls in this area, and they're all building these up. So what we're having is this militarization of the center of the South China Sea. And the South China Sea goes to, again, it goes back to, I'll switch back to our map here so that you can see this again. And again, bear with my technological efforts to figure out how to work this. Okay, and as we get back to our map, you will see that our trade routes, the Spratly Islands, are right in the middle between Philippines, and like in the middle of the triangle between the Vietnam, the Philippines, and Borneo. So it's sitting in that position. And you'll look up in the upper left-hand side off the coast of Vietnam. There are also another set of islands called, I believe, the Paracel Islands, that the Chinese and Vietnamese also have contested claims on. And again, the Vietnamese have built up their bases and are trying to build up their bases now in response to what the Chinese have done in the South China Sea. So what's happened here in recent times? So if you understand a little bit of the history. By the way, China is also doing the same thing with bases in the East China Sea between the People's Republic of China and Japan. So they are looking to set up this what looks to be either a defense or an aggressive perimeter around China, hegemony by the West. Or against us, sailed a fleet south of Taiwan, which you can see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen there, where the lines are coming through, of the ships going the other direction. We sailed the fleet through there. It was joined by other ships from both the Philippines as well as from Japan. We sailed down through the South China Sea to establish the freedom of navigation. Okay, because the international principle is waters that are navigated by everyone will continue to be open to everyone. And so what we're trying to do is establish the freedom of this navigation of the South China Seas to everyone. At least that's the supposed theory that's going on here. But what happens is this fleet that we took through there sailed down back to the Sumatra, back by the Malaccan Straits, and they practiced blockading the straits. So if you were to want to shut off the flow of oil and goods to the People's Republic of China, how would you do it? Well, the easiest way is going to be blockading all the traffic that runs between Malaysia and Sumatra. So what we did was we've been practicing and teaching the other nations involved with us how to run a blockade, how to establish and maintain a blockade. And our blockade this time was at the Malaccan Straits, but you can see all these different routes in. All of those different routes are going to have to be blockaded in one way or another to avoid the ships coming around in another direction and just circumventing the blockade. Well, what does this do? China, which has been growing extremely rapidly over the last 20 years, they've built up a massive economy. They're threatening to become the world's largest economy. They're trying to get involved in getting and elevating the yuan into an international currency, and perhaps at someday ultimately making the yuan, or the renminbi as they call it, to become gold-backed and replace the dollar as the world standard currency. Well, in addition, they have been building up their armies and making all their neighbors, of which they have been traditionally been enemies, in Vietnam and Laos and of course Taiwan and Japan. These are all people that have been natural enemies of China throughout the centuries, are getting rather nervous that this Chinese is building up this large army on their doorstep. And they see China getting its more aggressive because it's sending troops now into Africa to fight. And so they're wondering when that muscle flexing is going to turn its attention to their area where they are going to be cut off. This whole thing is behind the U.S. Asian Pacific that Obama and Hillary Clinton started 8 years ago when they did their Asia pivot. And they pivoted to the South China Sea and said, we're going to beef up in the South China Sea. And thwart the ability of China to establish a foothold there. In addition, we have tried to establish trade relationships with most of these nations throughout Southeast Asia and the Pacific through what was known as the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that was, again, to further close out China and keep them from gaining economic influence in the region. So our policy has been one of trying to thwart China's efforts to expand and to keep them, so-called keep them in their place. And I don't really know what the Chinese place is, because that's still to be resolved. They are becoming a world power, if they are not already. But we're still seeing them and treating them as if they were enemies, and treating them like they were in the Cold War, because we've held China at arm's distance for so long that we still treat them as if they are enemies. In fact, if you were to look at John Pilger's new film that's coming up called The Coming War on China, Pilger actually discusses, and he talks about the fact that we have 400 bases supposedly around circling China throughout. Let's see if I can get you a photograph of that before I start sharing this. And it's hard for me to talk while I'm doing this, but let's see if I can do it. There's one with the bases. Okay. And we'll go back to screen share. Yep. Okay, so you can see here we've got the bases here in the US. And you will see that these are all the bases that we have, all the way running up from Korea and islands off of Korea, all the way down through the Philippines. And this doesn't even include what we have in Japan. We have bases in Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Guam. And then we get down to the Malaccan Straits. I don't know where if we have troops there, but again, these are all places that they're saying that we have troops. So you can see what we've been doing is we have been encircling China and preparing to be and preparing ourselves to cut off their flow of goods and oil in the event of a conflict ever developed between China and us and or the rest of the world. That was to be our means of thwarting their expansionist efforts. And so long as it's remained peaceful, it's been good. But now they're getting more aggressive. They're starting to push back. They're feeling their might. And so what they're doing is they're pushing back against our efforts of expansion. And basically, our efforts are making them extremely nervous. They see this as a provocation, that we are, in fact, the aggressors, trying to encircle them and lead them and goad them into war. And is it possible that we are? Yeah, it's very possible that we are. I mean, the Obama foreign policy has been extremely aggressive in terms of trying to goad both Russia and China into war. We've been putting troops in the eastern and doing exercises, NATO exercises in Eastern Europe. We've been doing bases, circling bases around the Middle East and south of Russia. We have on the Russian side, and then on the Chinese side, we've been going around there. And so we've got this very strange foreign policy going on that seems like we're poking the bear and poking the big Chinese panda with a stick and daring it to fight back. It's as if we want them to fight while they're still weak so that we can defeat them and keep them down longer, so that we can get in and try to change some of the policies that they're doing or force them to recapitulate. I think it's a very misguided policy, and I certainly think it needs to be thought through. And it looks like Trump may be thinking it through, but I'm not sure he's thinking it through in the way of trying to back tensions down with China. It looks to me more like they are trying to ratchet up the tensions because of the new relationship with Taiwan. And of course, Trump's call to do with Duterte from the Philippines is trying to reestablish that relationship there to maintain the U.S. presence along the entire perimeter of the South China Sea. It is this presence that has been that has been questioned. The efforts have been questioned by John Pilger that I was just telling you about. And I'll see if I can get this here to play now. Okay. That didn't work. Let's try it this way. And there you go. And now we see we've got John Pilger's movie here, his official trailer on Vimeo called The Coming War on China. Unfortunately, it doesn't allow me to play it here. It doesn't appear to allow me to play it. All I can do is show it to you. But Pilger basically says that the war on China is something that we have been going to, that it's inevitable. This is a policy that was put in motion by Obama that unless Trump makes dramatic efforts to back it off, he is going to be continuing on the same war footing. But now Trump has come in with a more hawkish cabinet than what we had before, with military advisors in all corners of the cabinet, at least on the military side of things. So he is in danger of having to continue on this policy that Obama has started, which appears to be very misguided. Misguided from a peace standpoint, that it seems to be leading us closer and closer toward a direct confrontation with China, or either between us and China, or between China and some of the other surrogates or countries in the area, or what's going on in the South China Sea. And once it does, the risk is very high that we're going to be dragged into it, just as it is with our flyovers and military military efforts in the South China Sea to preserve freedom of navigation. So we're running into this series of bases that are being constructed, particularly the Chinese trying to push forward and extend the reach of their military. The Chinese have now built a small carrier, and they're starting to build war carriers again, that they can control and project force throughout the South China Sea. It is something that is going to continue to escalate. And we have to figure out, as a nation, as an administration, Trump has to figure out what the long-term vision is for the world and what the United States' role is within that world. Now, Trump has been a protectionist, nationalist, America first individual, promoting a policy that supposedly is to bring our troops home. But I think the issue is not to have foreign entanglements in the Middle East because they believe that those entanglements in the Middle East were wrong in the first place, were well thought out. But as far as the situation with Asia and China, it does not appear that Trump is going to be changing that policy. So what we can expect is increased tensions in the South China Sea. Right now, we're trying to find out even who Trump's Secretary of State is. And again, it's important to examine the Secretaries of State to say, well, how are they going to come in and relate in this situation? Because there are two primary areas that the Secretary of State is going to be our liaison, which is the relationships to Russia and the relationship to China. Okay, let's take, today, since we're dealing with China, question for each of these, whether it's Romney or Giuliani or any of the rest, is what is going to be their ability to articulate Trump's position with regard to U.S. policy in the region, and what is going to be their ability to keep things on a even keel and keep tensions down in those relationships. We saw in the news yesterday or recently that as a result of Trump's tweet on the Taiwanese president call that Henry Kissinger was called to China to talk to the leaders there. Kissinger he was involved when China was opened in the 70s, and he has been advising every president since that time on foreign relations. But with regard to China, the Chinese have found him to be a very stable and calming force for them, so they talk with him to try to get insight into U.S. policy. And then, lo and behold, Trump, who is getting advised by Kissinger as well. Sounds somewhat like a conflict of interest to me on Kissinger's part, unless he is acting as a special envoy for Donald Trump, going back and forth to try to assuage the concerns of the Chinese and get them so that they want to, that they will continue to work with us. Again, I believe the hope of everyone is that we can get to a place where we are maintaining an economic relationship with China that continues to grow and prosper for both sides, at least prosper as long as China starts playing by rules that Trump thinks are fair, such as the currency devaluations that they've been playing with, and other aspects of trade that policy that have been a thorn in America's trade deficit. But with regard to the situation in the South China Sea, it's going to be extremely interesting, to say the least, to see how Trump handles this. Trump is a negotiator. Trump is a disruptor. He ran on a campaign of disruption. And if you remember, disruption, if you follow business, disruption has been the big term in business circles for the last 10 years or so, where new technologies come in and disrupt the old ways of doing things, and people have to then readjust and form new standards and build a new status quo. And in this situation, it looks like Trump is going to be disrupting the existing foreign policy, at least as it regards China and Taiwan. Now, certainly in the long run, it would be better if we could recognize Taiwan, but to do so when we have already told the Chinese that we would not is not only a breach of protocol, but it would be considered a dishonorable move to go back on one's word. And the Chinese honor and respect matter. And to them, we are not showing them honor. We are not showing them respect. If anything, we are showing them distrust. And we are acting in ways that make them distrust us. And so both of us are escalating tensions by building up military forces in the area and essentially planning for the possibility that things deteriorate further and there's open warfare in one form or another, either through surrogates or on a limited basis, or, God forbid, a large-scale direct war between China and the United States and or any of its surrogates in the United States. And again, we know North Korea has already threatened to attack the United States, and it has nuclear capability. So we have a powder keg that is growing here, that's been building and building and building, and nobody knows if it's going to explode. And this is the situation into which we have put our new president. This other than the issues with regard to the change with the Taiwanese, none of this is Trump's doing. But he looks like he's now going to be making it his doing and changing the way that we relate to each other and trying to restructure those relationships. Again, though, this very well may just be a high-stakes poker game that Trump plays, because Trump is considered a master negotiator. And as one who negotiated deals for people for 35 years, it's important to give the image that you have something to trade, that you have something to give up, that you and you have to be strong in order to go into a negotiation. Because if you go into a negotiation just giving an indication of weakness, or that you have nothing that you are willing or able to sacrifice in the negotiations, you're going to find yourself limited in what you can accomplish. So it would appear to me that there is an element in this of Trump establishing bargaining power in future negotiations with the Chinese. That is very possible, but it is a game of chicken that could blow up in all of our faces. And I don't know that it is necessarily one to bash Trump over. I think this is one that has been coming, that has been building and building for the last several years under Obama, since he and Clinton started that Asia pivot. We need to rethink what our policies are in this country. We cannot continue on. Well, I don't know whether we can continue on the same policies, but what we're seeing is an evolution and a continuation of the policies that started after World War II with the Cold War with Russia, and then U.S. was the sole superpower, and so we spread out and started spreading our power all over the world, allegedly to keep peace, but in effect establishing an American empire. This empire, or so-called empire, is what is at stake. And we need to decide whether this empire is worth fighting for, and if so, how, when, and where. Or whether we should begin to withdraw and figure out what the world should look like without the American military presence in these regions of the world. If there were a gradual drawdown of U.S. capabilities, such as what we're talking about with Japan, building up their defense forces, and the elements in Japan also want to build offensive forces, and we heard during the debates that Trump wants to renegotiate with the Japanese to get them to begin carrying some of the burden of our defense of Japan, just like it does with NATO members. It wants, if we're going to be doing this, it wants to be paid for it. Okay, so Trump isn't mincing any words about the fact that the U.S. is basically a gun for hire that has established its umbrella around the rest of the world, and we expect them to pay us to keep the peace, because we're the sheriff that they brought in. Well, at some point, the question is, are they going to continue to keep us as the sheriff, or do we want to continue in that role? And if not, how do we withdraw from it? Because what happens to that vacuum? The nations that we're pulling out from are they going to have to beef up their own militaries, or continue beefing up their own militaries? Are these areas going to be moved in? Are the Chinese or the Russians going to move in, or other nations, or even terrorists moving into these areas when we vacate them and then take over and we further destabilize the world? This is an extremely difficult time that we live in, and there are no easy answers. We are going to try to bring you these reports as we go along, so that you can stay abreast of what's happening in these developments around the world as well as within our country. But what I would like to leave you with today is the thought of what is our world supposed to look like when all of these fights are done? How are we going to get to a place where everybody gets along? How are we going to get to a place that our economic competitors are not military competitors, and that we all begin to back off of this military footing that we're on? Because as we see right now, the so-called New World Order of the global elites that was trying to be implemented through the Western efforts of the IMF and the World Bank and NATO and Europe and TPP and the other trade deals that we're trying to put in place. Those were trying to establish a structure for what this New World Order should look like. And of course, there were those who were trying to be the ones at the top. We're going to be pulling those strings. But absent that, and I think that is dead, at least for the moment. So the question now becomes, what is the next phase to look like? Is it to be a world where we are stretched with the military trying to protect everything? Or are we going to start bringing our military back and consolidating and protect ourselves, and then do what is necessary to enable others to protect themselves? And again, that buildup of arms around the world that may not be in our hands, our direct control, puts everybody more at risk, because everyone now has the capability of making war on everyone else. So as these regional differences exacerbate and blow up, it will be easier and easier for the participants to fight it out. And maybe that's what we want them to fight it out for themselves, but or at least that's what we might want for future, for them to fight it out so that we are not involved in the middle of it. But right now we are in the middle of all of this. The South China Sea is a tinderbox waiting to explode. Just think what the repercussions would be if China attacks a ship of any kind or a nation from one of those island bases. Just think if they sail their fleet down through the Straits of Malacca, or God forbid that we initiate a blockade and they try to end our blockade by attacking our ships. Can we project enough force to maintain a blockade against that kind of attack? Do we even want to? Is it the kind of situation that could escalate beyond control and we end up with the whole world against us? These are things that we have to anticipate. These are things that we need to consider if we're going forward. But always, we need to find out and decide what our end game is going to be. What do we want to look like when it's done? I understand the power games and the geopolitical fights that are going on around the world. But I don't share that as part of my vision. I share a vision of a world of peace. And somehow we have to move beyond this increasing militarism and nationalism and the efforts to force our views upon others that is contributing to the tensions in our world today. This is what I think. What will Trump do? I don't know. Maybe you do. If you have any better ideas, please put them in the notes below. And I hope maybe you can even give me some tips on how to use the screen share here. I don't know what it's going to look like when I'm done. I'll have to go back and look at this thing and see if I really screwed it up. But we don't know. But you can understand what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find a way to present this to you live as opposed to doing them canned. But again, if we need to go start doing canned videos and preparing them in advance, we will. Well, because we want to make sure you get the information you need to make a knowing decision on where you stand in the world today. I'm John Dennison. If you enjoyed this video or other videos, please like and share it with your friends. And I would ask that you check out one of our websites, perhaps peaceoptions.com, where you can learn a little bit more about what we're doing to try to bring peace to your world. God bless you indeed. I'm John. Go with love.